Hi, hello, and welcome back to the HII Method. My name is Jen Hatz. I am the host of the HII Method podcast and also the founder of the HII Method, a holistic, integrative, and innovative approach to assessing and optimizing human health, well-being, and performance. And I'm partnered with Neuroforce One, a human performance company that has been training champions for years, and they offer training and assessments in their facility as well as remote options available. And I have a little story to share with you all. Actually, just a little story I want to chat about. I call it the Tale of Two Cities. No, it's not actually not going to go into Charles Dickens here and actually talk about the book of the Tale of Two Cities. But I like to think of it as this contrast of maybe the two different mindsets, really, like a contrast of perspectives or mindsets, and a little bit of like old school versus new school. So in my mind, it's like the Tale of Two Cities, but in reality, it's just a tale of two different perspectives. But that kind of like old school mentality, or maybe just a previous way of doing things, and maybe the idea that, well, this is how we do this because this is how it's always been done, versus new school type of approaches where it's a little more curiosity and a little bit more strategically trying new things and trying to innovate, trying to update because you're looking at something that maybe was always that way and now you're like wanting to innovate and improve upon it. So just this big contrast of two different worlds, really. And when it comes to really just this entire topic that I love to talk about is anything within like the health, wellness, and performance space. And probably the greatest little like example of this contrast of these worlds is really just the difference of the old school, new school. But I think the perfect picture of it is, if anyone's ever seen, well, everyone's probably seen Rocky IV, where you have the contrasting of Rocky Balboa, who is like the epitome of that like hard work mentality, that old school work mentality. He's the American, and he's, working with his hands and he's like, sprinting up hills in snow and lifting logs. And it's like this real, like gritty, hard work type of old school mentality where less is more and you do what you can with what you have and you grind away and it's gritty. And so like, that's like the one side of things. And then he's fighting against the, Ivan Drago for the Soviet Union. So it's like American, Russian, and the Russians in that movie, they're painted as the most like opposite of that old school hardworking mentality, where they're all about sports science and they're all about using tech and tools to their advantage and trying to get that extra edge above the competition by using all of this advancements in technology and tech and tools. And so I love that just thinking about Rocky IV, favorite movie, like favorite Christmas movie, first of all, right? Besides Christmas Vacation, but Rocky IV, that movie, I think, was like the first taste, at least for me, of that contrast of old school work mentality versus the new school, especially sports science type of advancements and innovations. And so I just love using that little contrasting of those two, the Americans and the Soviets, right? And of course, being an American movie, we know how it ends. But the reality is that contrast of that old school hardworking mentality versus the new school wanting to innovate and using advancements in technology, that is the very real contrast of opinions and perspectives that we have really across industries right now. And especially within the sports industry, that is like the probably perfect example of what it's like working within a performance organization right now, where you have a lot of still old school mentalities, a lot of the more, the previous generations that still have what they know, it's their tried and true. They want to work in this XYZ ways. And then you have the new school coming in trying to like innovate and update things. So yeah, but that was like my first taste of sports science too, was watching that movie and seeing that there was this contrast and that there was this use of updating how we view things and leveraging different advancements in technology to be able to then apply it back to something that was otherwise just very bare bones and gritty and hard work was the way to win it out, kind of a thing. So that was a little tangent there about Rocky IV. Sorry, it's an amazing movie. Love it. The training scene, like the training montage is amazing just because it keeps going back and forth between that like the gritty old school stuff versus like the new school where they're like literally, tracking down every single rep that Drago's doing and trying to like compare it against everything. And love it. But so that example kind of brings me down to really something that I've naturally operated in, a kind of a way that I've naturally operated in, is viewing things through this lens of the fact that there is and has been this old school mentality, maybe an approach towards things of this is how this has been done, and therefore this is how we continue to do it. And that kind of approach. But then also having a perspective that there is also another way. It's maybe the more new school way, but there is a need to continue to question maybe some of those old school things that have been in place and to really like ask the question, really, is there possibly something else to do in this respect? Is there something that we could do to improve it? Is there something better? So I've always liked taking that approach that there are in fact multiple ways to go about things, that there is that difference of old school, new school. And what I've done really from my experiences working, especially within sports nutrition, so like I said, working within those performance organizations where you do have that very real contrast of old school and new school that are constantly kind of button heads a little bit. Sometimes they work out well and there's a lot more cohesion and collaboration, but there's also a whole lot of butting heads. So let's get real here. But so a lot of the work that I've really taken upon myself is really helping to introduce and try to leverage and lean in towards that, not necessarily entirely the new school approach of trying to innovate and using technology, but at least allowing for that conversation to happen and at least stimulating that curiosity for those who are maybe very regimented in that old school work mentality, maybe starting to just plant those seeds that there are other ways to maybe start going about things, that maybe there is a little more that we can do with this thing that we're trying to do or whatever we're trying to optimize, right? And so from a sports nutrition standpoint, and this is probably the cool thing about this whole story that I'm going to share here. So what I was doing, especially when I was going through school, through internship, and then also through working professionally, I kept asking questions and I kept trying to understand why is it that maybe certain recommendations are being made, maybe certain practitioners or personnel or dietitians, maybe they're operating in a certain way, they're working in a certain way, they're getting certain recommendations. And I was constantly asking those questions really just out of curiosity, like, okay, that might be what the recommendations are. Is that really the best? Is that really what we should be recommending across the board? Is there maybe a better way to go about this? And so I was constantly basically feeding this fire of curiosity by asking these questions that were otherwise just the standard. And this, when I say standard, I mean this is the curriculum that is being taught. This is what is being tested on. So when you're studying your curriculum and you're actually taking the tests to be certified as a specialist in sports dietetics, you're being asked these very specific questions about, well, you're being tested on your knowledge about these very specific recommendations. And so I wanted to keep questioning. I'm like, why is it that these are the recommendations that are being given to everyone, really like across the board? The only real differences are like really minute differences of when and where you would change these recommendations. And I just kept like feeding this fire of curiosity and asking questions more and more. So the big thing, and this is what the big topic is today that I'm so excited to talk about. The big thing that I kept coming back to and asking, why is this the way that this is? Why is this a standard? So I want to go back first of all. So in the last episode, I believe it was the last episode or maybe the last two episodes, I started explaining about the gut and how your gut functions and when and in what circumstances your gut is functioning. And the big thing that I explained was the fact that, well, there's a few big things, but one of the big things that I explained was the fact that your gut is it's very heavily controlled by or influenced by your stress response. and your current state of stress. And so when you are in an elevated stress response, so when you are experiencing or you're in a sympathetic stress response, like if you are exercising, you are now in this elevated stress response. It's a good stress, it's a positive stress, but your body is still in this stress response. And so you have a decrease in really blood flow and stimulation down to your GI tract. So you're not supposed to be digesting when you are exercising. And this is what's happening within your body. Your body says, nope, we're going to reduce digestive functions because you instead need to channel that energy and that blood and all that stimulation for other means, which means, biologically to run away from a predator. But in this case, it's structured exercise. So you still need to channel that energy into this structured exercise. So you should not be digesting. So knowing this about how the gut functions in response to this change in your stress response. So this is something that, and this is what I think is funny. So in the field of sports nutrition, what you're taught, and this is what is taught in curriculum, this is what is then tested on, and this is what is then implemented in real life. The concept that they are taught is, well, because you don't digest well when you're exercising, we instead can develop and create all of these sports nutrition products that you can take. You can drink different drinks and chews and gels and all of these different ways to have very quick digesting carbohydrates, very quick digesting sugars that you can try to absorb very quickly because you otherwise don't digest well. And that way you can still have those sugars to keep you going. So this was my big question where I said, well, wait a minute. If your body is triggering you into a state where you don't digest well, because you're not supposed to be digesting, you're supposed to be doing other things with that energy, then why would you bypass that? Why would you ignore that and try to force something into your system that you would still need to be absorbing and digesting and absorbing it? And so like the entire time that I was in school and internship and working, I kept asking this question over and over. I'm like, why would we ignore the reality of what is changing in your body's physiology? You have a decrease in your digestive functions. Maybe that's because you're not supposed to be digesting. Maybe we shouldn't be forcing something into your system. But instead, like I said, so sports nutrition, what they have put together is these standardized and heavily researched and all like this is the bulk of sports nutrition curriculum and teachings and recommendations is around trying to continue to take in carbohydrates in the forms of simple sugars really during exercise, and especially during endurance exercise or longer duration exercise, as a way to continue to feed yourself with this quick digesting energy that you for whatever reason need to still have while you are doing these longer duration events. So I was already very skeptical. I'm naturally an optimist, but in this case I was very skeptical. I'm like, there's something here that needs to be addressed, because no one's asking the very obvious question of like, why would we force this into your body system when your body system is not prepared for it? It's not meant to be taking this in. And so that started getting me thinking. And at that point, I started learning that much more and really doing my own self-guided education and research on the gut and how the gut functions and what happens within the body. And that was when I knew and understood that difference in your stress response. And that's why you don't digest well. I couldn't understand why there would be this need for these recommendations then that you need to continue to take in. And something triggered for me in working, this is in real life working with clients then, that there's a very large need to address those exact things that I was questioning and wondering, like, this doesn't make sense. And having this contrasting opinion with the old school mentality of, well, this is just how it is. This is how the field is. This is what they've studied. This is what they are standardized in their curriculum for. And so I kept questioning it and wanting to see if there was maybe another way that we should be going about this. And it was the very real life situations of working with a client that triggered immediately. If anything, it not only confirmed for me that I was moving down the right path of thinking in this way, but it's, if anything, that much more alarming, I think, or more urgent, that now we do, in fact, have a stronger push on changing maybe some of those outdated methods or recommendations. So the story I want to share here about a client that I worked with, and he was an endurance athlete, not even just an endurance athlete. He was an ultra endurance athlete. He was an Ironman athlete. So we're talking about like incomparable length and stretches of time where he is exercising. I mean, like beyond what anyone would normally be going through on a day-to-day basis. This is not a typical like hour at the gym thing. This is extensive time spent training, ongoing, like on a daily, weekly, on a yearly basis, and competing in these Ironman competitions. So this is a specific caliber of athlete, and the type of athlete really, but the type of energy systems that he's relying on. And so for endurance athletes, like I said, with that whole spiel about, feeding carbohydrates consistently. So endurance athletes are really the prime population that gets the bulk of those recommendations, and they get the highest priority on that carbohydrates intake consistently, as if carbohydrate intake consistently is just as important as hydration intake consistently. Like that's the bulk of those recommendations being made. So get this. So I'm working with this client, and he had absolutely no concerns whatsoever. There was nothing on his mind that was problematic or concerning in any way. He's simply wanted to optimize performance, which is the most classic athlete's mentality. I just want to get better, right? I'm already healthy. And he really was. He was already a very healthy, highly functioning individual. He was competing well. He was also very highly functioning in day-to-day life with work and with business. So there was no red flags, no concerns, no symptoms, no signs, nothing at all that flagged a need to look into something. It was simply I want to get better, and I want to do whatever it takes to get better. Very typical athlete, right? So he goes through a battery of assessments, and these assessments are all different biomarker assessments, different. We're taking different body fluids. There was a blood assessment, there was a stool assessment, there was a saliva assessment, and we're looking at all these different biomarkers. And the important part about doing all of these different assessments is that we can get an idea of something that is happening, anything, and as best as possible, everything. But we can at least get an idea of something happening within his body, how his body is actually functioning, whether or not he's aware of it. Because like I said, typical athlete, what a typical athlete is consciously aware of as far as something that may be discomforting or something that is difficult or challenging, their sports psychology, their mind has been conditioned in a way to look away from that, or to turn something that can seem problematic or challenging into a positive thing. So we don't want to rely on this perception of symptoms or signs or something being challenging or off or wrong. We want to be able to take that with a grain of salt, and also take as best as possible what we can measure and truly assess against a norm. Something that we can identify as okay, if this is the norm and that you're here, this at least gives us some information besides what your perception is, your actual, cognitive, what has been conditioned into your mind in terms of your work ethic. So went through a battery of assessments, and the interesting thing was his stool assessment came back with the largest, it was nothing but red flags. The entire assessment was nothing but red. And what I mean by red, it was nothing but high biomarkers for bacteria. So all of his strains of bacteria were in a state of overgrowth. So what this is, when you have all of these bacterial strains that have been growing and it's an overgrowth, it's called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, so SIBO. And you may have heard or seen that word, SIBO, somewhere in the mix along, somewhere. But so what he was presenting with was SIBO. So this is an overgrowth of bacteria within his GI tract. And part of that, in addition to that, he had this excessive production of a biomarker that was actually really problematic. So when I say problematic, this biomarker it's a metabolic byproduct that is released by this bacteria, And the bacteria is growing rapidly, and it's continuing to release this byproduct rapidly. So you get this you not only have the overgrowth of bacteria, but now you have this overproduction of this biomarker, this byproduct, sorry. And so that byproduct is related to increased circulations of carcinogenic compounds. So it's actually increasing your risk for cancer, and specifically estrogen-related cancers, because it's also increasing your circulating estrogen concentrations. So when I explained all of this to him, it was the estrogen thing that got his mind going. He said, whoa, like didn't even think that was a thing that could be happening for me. So when I explained to him that, like, because of the extent of bacterial overgrowth and because of the extent that this biomarker has been accumulating, and the fact that it's related to increased cancer risk, and it's specifically increased estrogen-related cancers because you're increasing your circulation of estrogen, all of this is a cause for concern. And his big thing right away was the fact that I don't feel any symptoms. I don't feel any type of way like bad. I don't feel any concerns, like this can't be right. And so that was when I first had to explain to him that difference of what our perception is and what we train our minds to focus on or to turn into something else. You can change your perception of pain into a positive thing, especially like a lot of endurance athletes. They understand, they know what it feels like to feel uncomfortable, but they tap into maybe a different perspective of what that discomfort is because they're so used to feeling uncomfortable. There's nothing comfortable about being an endurance athlete. They recognize pain or discomfort in a different way, and they've trained themselves to do so. So I had to explain all that to him, first of all, to say, like, listen, we can't just throw this away and say that if you don't feel anything, that therefore there's nothing there, because we can clearly see that there's something here and we got to address it. And and then the next thing to try to explain to him, because the other thing was that not only was he not feeling symptoms, so he couldn't understand why, trying to figure out how this could happen. And he was like stumped. He's like, I don't understand how this can happen. I eat everything I'm supposed to be eating. I follow the plan that I've been put on, and I'm doing everything right to take care of my health and to do this, like I said, he was a highly functioning endurance athlete. He was absolutely to a T following this nutrition plan and protocol, all the recommendations based on all these carbohydrate intakes. And this was all actually done from a previous coach that he worked with when he was first then coming to me. So he was bringing all of this information to me for me to see. And so this was when I had the really cool, I think, moment of finally opening up this conversation to him, when I said, everything that you've been following, you've been absolutely following what you've been told. And that's everything that you could have asked for. What you're being told, though, what your guidelines are and the recommendations, you're being guided to take in these extremely high, it's high in refined sugar, it's high in very quickly digesting sugars. It's all of these different sports nutrition products that are drinks and gels and chews, and all different ways to get quick digesting carbohydrates, which is basically just simple sugars. That's the quickest way to describe what that is. It's simple sugars. So if you have carbohydrates that are foods that have fiber, that's one type or one source. That's really what I would consider carbohydrates. In this case, all of these sports nutrition products are simple sugars. And so explaining to him that you've been following this protocol of feeding yourself, taking in all of these simple sugars at these timed intervals throughout your training sessions. The problem is when you're training, you're in this different state. Your body's in a different physiological state. So you're not actually digesting and absorbing what you're taking in the way that you normally would. So your digestive functions of the organ itself, remember you have the gut as the organ. So that decreases, that organ function decreases, but you still have, so you have the organ and you still have the microbial population, the ecosystem, those microbes that are living inside of the organ. So just because the organ function decreased in this stress response, you still have all these microbes that are still very much active and alive. And guess what? Those microbes, they feed on what you feed on. They eat what you eat. So what you are taking in is feeding them. They thrive from fiber. So when you are taking in carbohydrates that have fiber, that's good for you and it's good for those gut bacteria. they don't do so well on those simple sugars. You're feeding them something that they'll eat it up, and then they will release this byproduct in return. So what we've seen, literally this was like presented to me in real time of how this process is working in a way. And I had having to explain to this individual that, like I said, you were following what you were being recommended, and that's all that you could have controlled. And thankfully, we had the opportunity here to do an assessment to really identify what's happening inside, and now to make sense of the fact that, hey, those recommendations that all of those other coaches and dietitians and practitioners are pushing, those need to be updated immediately, because what they are unknowingly doing is guiding individuals like yourself, like this endurance athlete, to feed your gut bacteria a whole bunch of sugar, and your gut bacteria is now growing and giving off this toxic byproduct. And thankfully, we caught this in time, because if you continue to go on down this route, continue to feed those gut bacteria and increase this circulating biomarker, you could have been that much more at risk for not only cancer, but for advanced stage of cancer without you even knowing it. This is how stuff happens without us even recognizing it. And if anything, it's not that it's sad, it's kind of scary. The fact that, like I said, he was following what he was being told. He was listening to the recommendations being given to him by expertise in the field. These are individuals who have literally gone through standardized curriculum and taken those board exams to get that certification, and now they're following through and giving recommendations that they were tested on all throughout school. So there's a need now. And this is why I love this idea that we need to continue to question what we're being told, first of all, but that we need to continue to feed that fire of curiosity and ask those questions about something that maybe has always been done. We need to continue to ask if that is truly the best way. Is there maybe something else that we're missing here? Is there something else we need to learn more and expand on before we apply this to human beings? And there's so much that goes into this topic. I get so jazzed. I know I'm probably going off on a tangent here because I get so jazzed talking about this topic. But to me, that, if anything, like I said, it kind of confirmed for me that I was going down the right route of questioning those things that were being pushed and being recommended to individuals. And so that has been, if anything, a little bit of like my calling card when it comes to working as a sports dietitian, at least, that I tend to see things very differently from what has always been. And it's working out in my favor. Not that it's working out in my favor. It's working out really well for the athletes that I work with, because we're able to identify these things that may have otherwise been completely missed by anyone who was not looking to continue asking those questions, right? Anyone who was following along with what they were taught and just repeating that, if anything, they are placing these individuals at a greater risk or at a disadvantage, because they're not looking that much further along and further ahead to see maybe there's a different direction that we should be moving if we just made a slight change now. So yeah, sorry if I just went on a whole tangent. Like I said, I get really jazzed talking about this topic because it's extremely important to me. And it's been, like I said, the calling card really for how I operate. But so going back to what I was saying about, so working with this athlete then, and the recommendations in order to address this bacterial overgrowth, because at that point it's crucial. We have to address this. We have to address your health. We cannot continue to push you through training, especially not with the current plan you're on. Like, change is needed immediately, pronto. So unfortunately, at that point in time, I didn't have an easy enough solution that would have allowed him to continue to train and just make changes. Instead, we had to go a complete, basically pulled the rug out from under him, because we had to change his diet entirely to really eliminate and really restrict carbohydrate foods during that window of time that we wanted to heal and remove this excess bacterial overgrowth. We could not continue to feed this bacteria carbohydrates because it was at a crucial point with this accumulation of this byproduct. We needed to really allow it to come down. So addressing his carbohydrate intake across the board meant that he could not train the way that he normally would have trained, which means that his entire lifestyle, an endurance athlete, an ultra endurance athlete, that is their entire lifestyle. So everything about his lifestyle had to change, and everything about his diet had to change, all in order to address this issue with his health, that he otherwise wasn't having symptoms that were obvious symptoms, but it was still very clear that this needs to change. So that was a very challenging and difficult conversation to have, and then process to implement, because you're asking someone to make these drastic changes in order to improve their health and promote their body healing from something that is destructive to themselves without them even acknowledging that it's destructive to themselves. That is a difficult conversation to have. If there's ever a conversation to have with someone, I don't recommend that one, because it is a tough one to try to get through and find a solution that you're all equally happy with. Now, something that is cool, though, that came out from that experience, from that real life experience, and that I'm really excited to share with it now and to get this kind of going and out there, is the fact that working with Neuroforce One, I've actually had the opportunity to collaborate with them on a supplement that is, in fact, helping to treat that bacterial overgrowth. And doing so in a way that all you need to do is to take this supplement throughout the day with your normal diet, and you can continue to work out and train reasonably during this period of time. And it's a 90-day protocol in total. And the supplement itself is made of a variety of different herbs and botanicals that are providing a low enough dose that you're not going to experience any adverse reactions or interactions, but that over time, the effects start to accumulate and start to balance out and really remove the overgrowth and help to heal up the gut lining, and help for you, as you're continuing to eat your normal foods, you then continue to feed your gut bacteria the good stuff that they want to thrive on. And so you end up basically completely changing your gut health in it's a much more gentle and natural approach without you having to change your lifestyle or your diet drastically. Because that's the last thing I want for you to have to do, is to make those drastic changes, because like I said, that is a difficult conversation to have. So very excited that this is actually a product that is now being put out in the world. It's called Reset. So very appropriate name for this entire function that is approaching, well, it's treating for any type of a dysfunction within that gut environment, especially in this case, bacterial overgrowth, and doing so in a way where you're helping to reset your gut health without this completely overblown, without me pulling the rug out from under you and having to change everything around. So I think it is amazing, and I'm so excited. If you are interested to know whether or not you would be a good fit to try out the supplement, if you would need it, really, there is a questionnaire that is on the Neuroforce One website that you can go through the questionnaire and start to identify if there are potential risks or risk factors that could be leading you to having this GI health dysfunction. And if so, then using the supplement protocol of Reset could actually help to benefit you. So very cool. Like I said, with Neuroforce One is where that survey, that questionnaire is being it's being provided on neuroforce1.com. And so I guess that was really just the big story that I wanted to share, though. I get so excited when I talk about it. And so the other thing, so this Reset is, I see it really long-term vision, that it's not only helping on an individual basis, where in this case, like someone who is an individual who may have a bacterial overgrowth, that this is it's a natural, safe alternative to what may otherwise be a harsher road to go. And so what I see and what I'm going to be working on researching very heavily is whether or not this formulation can actually be useful as an alternative to an antibiotic for certain situations when an antibiotic would have been given. Maybe if there's instead at least an option for a non-antibiotic route that will achieve the same results, that will do the same thing functionally within your body. It depends on why and in what ways the antibiotic was being given. But the big picture overarching goal that I have for this direction is that we end up reducing antibiotic resistance, and that we turn this into a version that is appropriate for livestock. and that by applying this type of a treatment approach as a natural way to help balance out the GI health for livestock, the amount of not only, like I said, reducing antibiotic resistant strains would be huge, but then on top of that, you can actually help to curb the methane emissions that are coming from livestock because of their gut health. So that's what I'm like. That's why I get really jazzed here, because there's like a really big potential overarching goal here from what this blend of ingredients can do, knowing what they do in the body. But we at least have right now a human version. So if you are a human version that may be at risk, or you want to see if you are at risk for bacterial overgrowth, like I said, that questionnaire is on neuroforce1.com. Otherwise, for the sake of today, that was my little story about the Tale of Two Cities. Like I said, the old school mentality versus the new school mentality. So otherwise, take it easy, guys, and I'll see you again soon. All right, bye-bye.